Folks, thank you so much for coming back and for joining us so far for our spring annual conference. Our next speaker is Dr. Bethany Simonich. She is the Vice President of Innovation and Research at Quality Matters headquarters, an educational nonprofit. This Quality Matters is an educational nonprofit dedicated to quality online learning at all levels of education. In this role, Dr. Simonich leads efforts to help institutions, faculty, and staff make data-driven, research-based decisions to implement quality assurance best practices and to promote online student success. In her 20-plus years in higher education, she has held faculty roles for both in-person and online teaching, and also worked in educational technology, instructional design, and faculty development for online learning. She has history in probably all of the roles that our participants today have as well. As an online learning administrator, she has created and managed instructional design processes and teams, led faculty development for online teaching, and served in leadership and consulting roles for the institutional, state, and national efforts for online quality assurance. Dr. Simonich is also co-director of the CHLOE project, which is the report that refers to the changing landscape of online education. This report presents the unique perspectives of senior leaders in online learning from U.S. higher education institutions. And she is the co-author of High Impact Design for Online Courses, HIDOC, which she will be talking about today. This presents an instructional design model purpose-built for the unique considerations of online learning modalities as is recommended through Quality Matters and the standards based there. So with that, the floor is yours, Dr. Simonich.
Thank you so much, Diane. I really appreciate it. And also, hi to all of you. Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you. As Diane mentioned, you probably know that I do work for QM, but I'm taking off my QM hat a little bit today to talk to you about HIDOC. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Also, great job, Megan. Very, very hard presentation to follow. My presentation is not as much focused on AI, but I'm going to call out throughout the slide deck different opportunities that you have, especially with using the design documents for HIDOC and incorporating that in that prompt engineering with AI. So I also have some resources to share with you at the end, but I don't have dual monitors, so I'm going to have to wait until I close out of this, and then I'll pop some additional resources for you in the chat at the end. All right, so a little bit about the objectives. I'm going to go over briefly the 8 steps in the HIDOC model. So HIDOC stands for High Impact Design for Online Learning. And as Diane mentioned, it is the instructional design model that is purpose-built for online learning. So we're going to give an overview of the steps that are involved in the process. And I'm also going to talk about the companion resources, which are available free online. And I'm going to give you that address in a minute. And we're going to do a deep dive into some of those documents as well. So you can see kind of some of the opportunities to work with them, especially when trying to generate some good ideas for assignments, for example, using AI or even instructional materials. So first, I want to address probably the question that many of you might have in your mind, and give me in the chat an indication of what your role is. Are you an instructional designer? Are you a faculty? Do you feel like you wear both hats? But I'd love to get a sense of who all is in the room. Okay, faculty, lots of faculty, instructional designer, both, right? And I don't mean to imply at all that faculty aren't also designers, so please don't take it that way. But okay, so it seems like a really good mix, a little bit more faculty than instructional designers. Okay, so one of the questions that we get is, why did you develop a new course design model? There's lots of great models out there, backward design, ADDIE, Dick and Carey, for example. But when I utilized those as a faculty member, I was faculty before I left teaching to become an instructional designer. I always had to adapt it to the online classroom. So instead, we created a model that really attends to the unique considerations of online. And I have my co-authors here. They are with me here today in spirit, Dr. Andrea Gregg and Penny Ralston-Berg. I'm sure many of you know Penny especially. She works for Penn State World Campus. But speaking about, let me get to my cursor there. Why did we develop the new model? In short, because modality matters. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It is a consideration that really needs to be present from the start of the design. It impacts your design choices. It impacts your design options in some cases. We also know that online learners need unique supports, right? So there's many ways that we support our campus-based learners, but there are additional ways that our online learners need support. Probably the longest or the biggest chapter in the book is step 7, and that is about learner support. So we really tried to focus on all the unique ways that we need to support our online learners so that they can be successful. And we also wanted to acknowledge that continuous improvement is planful. So when I was teaching, or even when I was in the instructional design role, courses get revised every 2, 3 years, whatever type of cycle that you're on. And we were always left with this question at the beginning of that revision. Well, what should we revise? What's working and what's not? And that became a strictly faculty conversation in most cases. Those student evaluations of instruction often don't ask the students about course design. So we built continuous improvement into the process. It is a whole new step. It is step 8. And we're going to talk about some ways then to get good data and to plan for that revision so that it's beneficial to you and your students. So I did want to mention at the start that there are free resources that are available at HIDOCmodel.com. So there is a book, but from the start, we decided that we didn't want the cost of a book to be a barrier to people using the model. So there's a companion website, and all of the design documents that we use within the book, as well as the course blueprint, I'm going to do a deeper dive into that. They're available online. There's also some sample things that are available online as well. So our hope was that if it wasn't, economical to purchase the book, you might even get a copy from the campus library, but you would have access to all the documents on the website as well. So we do want to say at the outset that it is research and practitioner based, but we didn't write it as an academic book. So hopefully it's a little bit more fun than a traditional academic textbook. What we had in mind was really a sort of scenario where it's an ID at your elbow. You and I are sitting in a coffee shop. You're the faculty member, or maybe you're an instructional designer working with a faculty, and we're having a conversation and we're helping you along the way. But we do want to let you know that it is embedded with research supported best practices as well, and we have done the work. So we truly wrote this book, and we started early on in the pandemic. It was in spring of 2020 that we started writing this. And that was because we realized that faculty need access to something that is accessible in terms of course design, that isn't limited by whether or not they have access to an instructional designer. And we have been doing this for, as you can see, they're collectively over 70 years. So between the three of us, we have designed and developed and taught hundreds of courses. We have so many lessons learned, and what we really tried to do is to ease the burden for faculty and instructional designers alike, and hopefully create a nice streamlined process to designing high quality online courses. So a little bit about how the book is structured. In part 1, we lay out the 8-step model, and that's what I'm going to provide the overview of today. There are design documents for each step, and that is what is available free on the companion website. And you can think of those as thought docs or thinking docs. So there's guided prompts to help you get some of those ideas down on paper, and then they all cascade into what we call a course blueprint at the end. So we take you and walk you incrementally through the design of your course, and you can start at the beginning, or if there's a particular step that you want to concentrate on, you could do that as well. There's also some bonus development docs. So what does that mean? Well, design and teaching face-to-face, as you know, they're pretty much combined, right? But online, you have to have that course designed and developed and up in that learning management system prior to the course beginning. And that design phase, that pedagogical thinking, that how you're going to structure the course, ideas for your assignments, etc., that needs to happen before you actually develop those materials, before you actually develop those quiz questions or exam questions. But we do give some bonus development docs. So one, for example, talks about rethinking. You might have a PowerPoint, for example, that you are presenting face-to-face, or maybe you've been using it online, but you realize it's a little bit too long. We have a development doc for rethinking that. There's also a development doc that I'm going to talk about that goes through assignment prompts specifically for online modalities. So all the things that we talk about face to face in terms of, here's some things to watch out for. Here's some problems students typically encounter when they do this assignment. We have built it into an assignment prompt template for you to kind of prompt your thinking for all the things that you need to communicate to your students. There's also a bonus chapter on online teaching, and you can think of that as the execution of the design. That bonus chapter on teaching is also fully available on the HIDOC website. So you get the whole chapter. For you instructional designers, that's a great thing to share with your faculty. I know that the faculty ID process is embedded with a lot of good collaborative conversations, and sometimes you're so focused on design, you don't have a chance as much to talk about teaching. So we included some of those ideas for you. Part 2 of the book then is really full of our lessons learned. So these are case examples and how you can use HIDOC to improve courses, revise courses, but they are all based on real life courses that we have personally worked on or taught. And hopefully you can avoid some of the pitfalls and missteps that we have gone through with faculty that we've worked with. It also includes example consultation. So if you are an instructional designer and you're thinking about maybe using HIDOC when you're working with faculty, at the end of each chapter is a sample consult, and we kind of put in the tough questions that we get from faculty. So it gives you an idea for how to answer those. Now, if you're a faculty working on your own, it's going to answer those tough questions that you probably have in your mind for each step. So we tried to give you an idea of how those conversations can go. So we really wanted to better enable that faculty ID collaborative relationship as well. That bonus step for delivery, we know that teaching presence starts with design, and we do talk about presence throughout the book, but it follows through that delivery stage when you actually get to interact with students and provide guidance and feedback and mentoring. So there's lots of information on just-in-time teaching tips, guidance for elevating regular and substantive interaction. There's also sample announcements that you can use throughout the term. And of course, all of these things are just ideas. You can edit and use them as you see fit for what works best for you and your course. And then in that case example book, there are 10 example cases. And again, the idea there is to give you some insights so that you can proactively avoid some of the pitfalls that we've encountered. And then examples really of how to use HIDOC in targeted ways. We know that many of you have existing online courses. You're not going to be designing a course from scratch. So there's lots of ideas for targeted improvement as well. All right, a little bit about the 8 steps. And as I mentioned, you can work through these sequentially, or you can focus on specific steps. Maybe, for example, you really want to look at your assignments and activities and do a deeper dive into that. Make sure you have some authentic assessments. You can concentrate on step 4. So this is the broad overview of the 8 steps. We start out with learner analysis, and that is sort of like the A in the ADDIE, but it really is specific to online students. Then we move on to learning outcomes and then structuring your course. So we get into that course structure early because, again, that is different for online. You have to lay out your course in a web-based environment. I don't have to do that for face-to-face teaching. So that is an additional step. We then talk about assessments and activities, instructional materials, technology, and tools. There is the longest chapter there on online learner support. And as you can see, a lot of these do align with the QM rubric. So it does kind of take you through the different portions of those general standards. And then finally, there is that new step there on continuous improvement. And again, that's focused really on academic online courses. So learner analysis. Here's where we start out asking about who your potential students are. And once I'm able to exit this screen and put some things in the chat, I have an annotated version of the design document that I'm going to share with you. But for step 1, when we talk about potential students, we're making sure that your course design is student-focused from the start. And these aren't your typical questions of just who takes your course. And, you kind of scribble down, well, in general, they're sophomores or they are students within the major. We talk about a lot of things that maybe you hadn't considered with your students. So, for example, are the bulk of your students maybe working adult professionals? That, for example, might impact when you have your due dates and your due times. We talk about things like what are some misconceptions that your students come in with. So typically students don't come into our course with no knowledge. They might come in with some knowledge. They might also come in with some incorrect knowledge. So there might be things where you need to course correct before you launch them into learning new material. We also make sure that from the start you are designing for relevance. So this is one of those research supported best practices. We know that when things are relevant to us, whether it's, us taking a professional development workshop or your students taking your course, they want to know how it's going to help them, why it's relevant to them. And so those are some of the questions that we include in this particular design doc. Next, we move on to step 2, which is learning outcomes. This is probably something that you are familiar with. Of course, we concentrate on measurability, making sure it's something that can be evaluated. And again, it's stemming from who your learners actually are in that step 1, but it makes sure that your design starts with that good firm foundation of measurable learning outcomes. You have that shared vision and goals with your students, and that could also generate some shared enthusiasm. So your learning outcomes, as we know, they're the foundation for your design. Very hard to design assessments to measure learning outcomes if they're not measurable. So we do a deeper dive into really thinking through your learning outcomes and what you need them to be in order for your students to really achieve that mastery by the end of their course. Next, we moved on to step 3, and this is not a common step in instructional design models. This is, again, unique to the online learning environment. So how is that course going to be organized? And here we start out by chunking up into that skeletal structure of looking at those modules or learning units, whatever you choose to call them. But here's a place where you start to hone in a little bit. You funnel and focus the ideas for your course. You're thinking about those larger topics, how they might sequence out during the term, and you start to plan a learning path. So that's what we call it in HIDOC. It's not about structure and organization as much as it is about creating a good, well thought out learning path for your students to follow. This is also the beginning of that course blueprint. So again, this is something that will help you if you do use QM and maybe you want to go up for a QM certified review. We know that now you have to submit an alignment map. That course blueprint functions as the alignment map, and we get that started for you early, so it's not an afterthought. It's not one more thing you have to do after all of your design work. Pardon me. In step 4, then we move on to assessments and activities. I don't know if any of you caught my webinar. I know it's up on QM's YouTube channel, but I did a whole webinar just on assessments and activities. It's one of my favorite topics, but we separate them out and we make sure that your students have activities or opportunities for them to use their new knowledge in low stakes ways before they are assessed on that knowledge. And then, of course, we also talk about assessments, both formative and summative, but it's application focused. We talk about authentic assessments. We try to give you some ideas to kind of expand your thinking around different types of assignments that you can have in your course. And I know that this is tough. I've taught online for many, many years. And as I mentioned, I started out teaching face-to-face. That transition to online was very difficult. All the things that I felt that I could do well in that face-to-face classroom, I didn't know how to translate them into something that would work online. And I too heavily relied on things like multiple choice quizzes and exams. So we give you lots of ideas and examples. You'll also find additional examples by utilizing those assignment prompts that I mentioned in that development doc. But it makes sure that your students have that opportunity to use these activities, prepare them for success, get some feedback from you when it matters the most before they move on to those assessments that are going to evaluate their learning. Next, we move on to instructional materials. So this is where you're creating those PowerPoints or other types of multimedia and engaging materials as well. And both for step 4 and step 5, I think there are great opportunities, especially to use the design documents as AI prompts, right? So if you're teaching a course and you say, traditionally, I'm teaching on this topic, et cetera, Traditionally, I would assess students with a multiple choice quiz or exam. Can you give me some additional ideas that are more engaging? And that I really want them to make sure that they utilize this information, that they're able to apply X and Y, et cetera, et cetera. And same thing with instructional materials. You can, I'm actually working on something, providing some feedback from a D2L. They're working on something called Lumi that allows faculty to essentially use AI prompts to say, here's my existing content. Are you able to suggest improvements for this? How might this shake out into modules throughout the term? So there's all these opportunities here to really use all of the documentation that we provided in the design docs and use that within your prompt engineering to help generate some of those good ideas. I do think one of the best uses of AI in course design is to help you get out of your own thinking patterns, right? I tend to rely on specific types of assignments that I like to grade, I like to do. They've historically worked in the courses that I teach. But when I started to use AI to try to get outside that box, even for my instructional materials, I got some good ideas that I didn't think about on my own. So I encourage you to think about its use in that way. In step 5, we concentrate on things like curate versus create. We know that you can't create everything for your course, and there's lots of good material out there for you to use. We also focus on content that students need to know versus all the other extraneous content that you may want them to know or is good to know. So here's in step 5 is where we really start talking about rigor and workload as well, and to be cognizant of what we're assigning students and how long it would take them to complete something, not how long it would take you as the expert or the faculty member to complete something. We also focus on aspects of inclusivity, and look, we talk about digital accessibility. So making sure also that your students have options. We talk about voice and choice as well, especially with instructional materials. So hopefully this will expand your thinking a little bit and give you some new ideas for materials to include in your course. Step 6, we talk about technology and tools. And this is also something that typically you do not find in an instructional design model, but you can't get away from using technology and tech tools when you're teaching online. So as you can see, the model is very pedagogy first, technology second, using technology wisely to support your pedagogical goals, to support your students' success in those learning outcomes. So we make sure that we're using that pedagogical approach first. We want to keep that cognitive load low. We talk about in the book how every time you add a new piece of technology, you're asking students to learn that new piece of technology. And so they're learning that at the same time that they're working with and learning the course topics. And so it's a balancing act, and you get to decide really where you want them to spend their cognitive time and energy. We also talk about planning for using technology, the required skills that students may need to use. If you're introducing something new, how to really support students well within that, trying to lean on technology that is supported by your institution as well. And we guide you through things like making sure that you demonstrate the use of technology for students, ways to provide support, even including activities that allow them to practice before they use technology for an assessment. And then online learner support. It is my favorite chapter. It is the longest chapter, but there is so much information here about how to uniquely support online students. You can see here is one place where we have that bonus development doc. This is something else I'm going to put in the chat at the end. So we have an annotated version of that for you. And I think that the annotated versions are going to be really helpful if you utilize AI and AI prompts to kind of help you design that course. So this goes through the whole gamut of how we can support online learners. We talk about scaffolding and sequencing so that they have time to get feedback from you, and there's enough space for them to utilize that feedback before they go on to, for example, that summative assessment. We talk about making sure that your assignment prompts really are in depth and they give students all the information that you would be giving to students if you were talking about that assignment in a campus-based classroom. There's different places where you can check your assignments for clarity. You can get a buddy. It's also a good Thanksgiving or dinner activity. You can ask people who are not in your class, who are not familiar with the topic, does this make sense to you, right? So we give you little tips like that as well, but a lot of resources to make sure that your students are set up to succeed, and probably a lot of things that you did not think about initially. So we talk about welcoming and engaging students from the start. So for example, creating a course overview or an orientation, and give me a yes in the chat if that's something that you already regularly do. Do you create a course overview as like a video welcoming students, just introducing themselves to you? Wonderful. Okay. Ways to proactively support your students, making sure that they understand who you are, what your role is, so they start to feel those important feelings of connection and belonging from the beginning. Research tells us that online students do not reach out as frequently to their professors as face-to-face students do. And one of the reasons is they don't feel that they know them as much. I still know of online classes where the instructor doesn't even have their picture up, let alone a video. And that really, I think, increases that transactional distance, that feeling of disconnect. So we talk about the impact of a lot of those things. We talk about how it impacts your own teaching presence as well as social presence. We also talk about creating a feedback loop with your students. So in step 8, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We give you lots of ideas for student feedback questions, but also ways to utilize them throughout the course so that students are only giving feedback for students that will take the course in the future. We want to create open communication. And then finally, in step 8, that is focused on continuous improvement. So I'm going to do a deeper dive into some of these design documents in a second, but this really is intended for you to help keep information on hand for things that you know you didn't have time for when you were designing your course to begin with, but also collecting information as that course is running. Maybe you teach it 1 or 2 times before you decide to make any revisions. You need to have a place for these. You need to have a really good, thoughtful process for this as well. Otherwise, again, when it gets to that revision time, you're thinking, well, I'm making a guess as to what was most important to my students, what maybe to remove, what maybe to add. So that continuous improvement also emphasizes that we are focused on an iterative approach. We know how busy faculty are. We have been in that situation. IDs, we know what your course load is like as well. You cannot design most times the course that you really want to design the first time out of the gate, right? It takes iterations, it takes revisions. It could just be a lack of time. You may have a lack of resources. Maybe you want to try out a new assignment, but you only want to put it in one module and see how it works before you put other instances of that in the course. There's lots of reasons that you want to do an iterative approach. One of the biggest reasons, though, is it takes that pressure off. It's not a one and done, right? You know that you're going to come back to it. You know that all of your ideas that you didn't get to, or maybe didn't have a chance to incorporate, you know that they're saved for you as well. So it's a plan for continuous improvement. So as I mentioned, you have free companion documents available on hidocmodel.com, and that includes the design documents as well as the 2 bonus development docs, and then also the course blueprint. So a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these. So one of the design documents for step 8 for continuous improvement is what we call a revision roadmap. So as you're designing the course, your IDs, as you're working with faculty, there's lots of notes that you can keep on this document. One is what we call a fix list. So let's say, for example, you got this course assignment very late. You only had a couple weeks. You're putting together things the best that you can, but you did not have an opportunity to fully close caption all of your videos. That is a very common example. That goes on your fix-it list. You know that digital accessibility is important. You know that those need to be closed caption. Maybe you didn't have time before the course began. That's something that you can note there. Things that also might be on the fix list is Maybe you were really searching for a great piece of content. You didn't have time to create your own. So you put in something that met the need, but it's really not what you want. That might go on your fix it list as well. Something that you know needs a little bit of attention. There's also a place there for something that we call a wish list. These are things that you know you wanted to do, but you didn't have time to do, or maybe you didn't have the resources to do, or maybe you didn't have the skill set at the time to do. So things like this might be you wanted to, make better slide decks. You wanted to do something with new technology. You didn't have the time. Maybe you need, some workshops, professional development yourself in order to adequately learn something. Maybe also you wanted to expand on some of the content, or you wanted to do a different type of assessment, also goes on your wish list. So those are two big things that are on your revision roadmap, as well as other ideas for improvement. So there's a place while the course is running to essentially use this as a reflective log. So when you grade that assignment from students, and let's say that 1/3 of them really misunderstood something in the assignment, you know that there's probably something that you want to attend to on that assignment prompt. You would put that under those other ideas for improvement. Maybe even as you're providing feedback or guidance to students, you realize that, oh, I really do need more instructional material on topic X. And maybe you make that optional, but you found that a good proportion of your students need some additional background information in order to move on. You can note that in your other ideas for improvement. Another design doc that is in step 8 is what we call a teaching calendar. So my advice to faculty has always been, don't design a course that you can't teach. And what I mean by that is, and I've been in this position, you can design a wonderful, robust course that is quote unquote perfect for student learning, but it certainly is not perfect for your schedule, right? You may be teaching 4 courses that term. And if you have, for example, students in all 4 of your courses turning in a 10-page, research report on the same day, and then you've given yourself the weekend to turn around 60, 100 papers, to give feedback on that draft, that's not doable for you. So this is making sure that your design doesn't just work for your students, it works for you as well. And we ask you to plot things out. Then you can look at this across all of the courses that you're teaching. When are those assignments due? Then you put in information for when you're going to actually grade that and provide feedback, because you need to really look at your own schedule as well. When you're going to be holding office hours, are there places where you want to note that you're going to offer additional clarification and guidance? Maybe there's set announcements that you want to put in your teaching calendar so when they are going to be released. And this allows you to look holistically in a macro level view, not just for that particular course, but for all courses that you're teaching that term. So this is where then, you can say to yourself, I really need to change some of these due dates so that I really am able to provide good, robust feedback on this formative assessment before students revise it. This is also even where you look at the due dates for student assignments. If, for example, you're turning back a draft with feedback, and then 2 days later, you're asking them to turn in the final version of that, you may want to consider giving them more time so that they could really put your feedback to use. So this gives you that global view to make sure things are doable for you. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the course blueprint at the end, and alignment maps and course maps, and why they're so important. So we know that they are now required for QM certified reviews, but really I see them as a tool for alignment. It's something that I always created for my courses, especially when I started to teach online. And even though I do this for a living and I teach graduate level classes in instructional design and online teaching, there has never been a time where I get to that fully completed, filled out alignment map at the end where there isn't at least one thing where I have to tweak it or go back and look at it and make sure that things are fully aligned. So it is a document that is so helpful to you for the design. It gives you that macro level view after you've really been in the weeds with all of these particular design steps and with all of your design thinking. It also gives you that student perspective for how that course and that learning path especially is really going to unfold as the term goes on. It shows you when things are connected, but also when maybe they're not connected, right? So it'll highlight for you, maybe you need a little bit more, targeted instructional material in order for students to do well on this assignment. It gives you opportunities to look at your assessments and say, I think we should have an activity here. This assessment is a pretty high bar, even the formative one. This is new knowledge for my students. I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to work with that in a low stakes way and get feedback before they move on to the evaluation stage, the assessment stage. It also helps you to look at variety and that scaffolding and sequencing. So to make sure that it's not just a text-based load of instructional materials, but that you have different ways for students to interact with the material. And finally, it's a way to kind of start to get that check on that rigor in terms of workload for students. They can be difficult though. It might be the first time that you're seeing alignment issues. I think the biggest reason why they sometimes are not a useful tool is you can fill them in by simply putting like module 3 discussion, module 3 quiz, right? That doesn't really speak to the alignment of that discussion or the alignment of the quiz. So what we encourage you to do is to give a little 1 to 2 sentence explanation. Since the alignment map really is for you, although a lot of faculty choose to put it in their course so that students really can see that learning path laid out, it is really something where it's important for you to go back and look at the content of that particular assignment or look at that particular piece of instructional material and see whether or not that material actually supports students in achieving, in working with that assessment and ultimately then achieving that aligned objective. Sometimes these are things, if you find an alignment issue, it might be difficult to fix without some professional development or without a discussion with an instructional designer, but we do give you some tips in the book for some common alignment issues and how to fix them without losing your mind. So one tip though that we have and that's built into the model is to start mapping early. So as I mentioned in step 2, learning outcomes, your course learning outcomes are the foundation of your design, and it's also the beginning of your alignment. Everything ties back to that because that's where you want your students to be in terms of their performance and their learning by the end of the course. So this means that it's really helpful to start structuring your course out early, especially in that macro level view for those big topics. So this, for example, is a portion of the design doc for step 3, that modular course structure, where we're asking you to think about that learning path that you're going to create, look at the length of your course, the big topics that you might be touching on, and then how that might map out. And if you're thinking, this is actually a really great use for AI, you're right. So if you're not sure how to structure your course out, you've never really started doing that mapping early, you can use an AI prompt where you talk about what is the description of the course. You can put in your learning outcomes because by step 3 you will have drafted your learning outcomes. Emphasize what are the big topics in the course, maybe some things that students typically struggle with. Put in your own information and opinion for things like, I think I'm going to need more time for this topic versus this topic. And then say we have 15 weeks, whatever, 7, 8 weeks, however long that term is. It might be a shortened course. How would you structure this out in terms of a good learning path for online learners? And I do also want to add, if you have an existing course that you're trying to change to a shortened format or a lengthened format, so a lot of courses might be held, full term during the fall and the spring, and then in the summer, it's very common to have those shortened summer courses. That's another great use for AI. You can put in your existing alignment map, your existing structure, and say, I need to keep the same information, right? Educational parity, but I need to now have this in a compressed format of 7 weeks or 8 weeks, and let them know that students will be going from, for example, 9 hours of total work per week in a 15-hour course to then the amount that they would in the shortened course, right? I've found a lot of good success with AI and giving some feedback on that as well. So in that design doc for step 3, you're really just looking at the module titles, the length, and we also give you a box to provide some additional info. And here's where you can put in things that you might already have for that particular module. Here's where you can put in things like, I need to get some professional development on this piece of technology, or I want to work with an instructional designer to create some targeted authentic assessments for this, anything such as that. And then that leads into the course blueprint. So that course blueprint maps your outcomes, that modular course structure. So we take it down to the module level as well as that larger macro level of the course. It looks at your activities, assessments, materials, and then also the technology, tools, and supports for your online learners. This also can be a handoff document. So because design precedes that development, where you develop all those materials, you upload them into the LMS, there may be actual development that you're doing in the LMS. Depending on how that process goes, this might be a good handoff document or companion document for collaboration with instructional designers or educational technologists. If you're working faculty members solo, this also creates a good to-do list for you, right? So for example, that now you have to actually create these particular assignments, you have to create these materials or curate that material as well. It's also a good thing, again, to give you that macro snapshot so you know some things that are maybe outside of the scope. They might be aligned, but they're tangential. They don't fall into that need to know, need to do. And that's then an opportunity for you to say, I'm going to keep these in here, but I'm going to make them optional. And you really give good information to students why they may want to interact with them. So this is the Design Doc course blueprint. Again, this is available free online. And the other reason we made it available free online is even for those of you that have the book, we wanted you to be able to download something that is an editable document. So you don't have to go to the photocopy machine and make lots of copies. So these are in the book, but you also then have that editable version that's available to you online for free. So in that course alignment map, we start out with the module and then the aligned course learning outcomes that address things within that module. When we look at the assessments and the learning activities, content and materials, and then technology and additional notes. So I'm going to close out of here so I can put those items in the chat for you. But as a final reminder, just wanted to let you know the website is hidocmodel.com. If you have any questions or anything that we could help with, please feel free to reach out to us at hidocmodel@gmail.com. For example, a lot of faculty and IDs have had book clubs around the book, so we're happy to do an author talk or do Q&A or anything such as that. And we're also working on some options for training as well, if that would help. So let me close out of here. Okay, and did I stop sharing? Okay.
You did, yeah.
All right, so here's the things that I'm going to put in the chat, and these are not on the website. These are bonuses for you as a big thank you for attending today and allowing me to speak with you. So this is the annotated version of that step 1 learner analysis. So the design document is a little bit more bare with the prompts. This is the annotated version. So again, this is perfect for working with AI to help you even generate some things maybe that you haven't thought about in terms of your learners, their unique needs, their unique situation. This is the annotated version of the assignment prompts, right? So it's really going to walk you through all of that thinking. Again, really good use for AI. And then finally, I have for you, and this one is up on the website, but if I can copy and paste. Okay, this is collected all in one place. Those student feedback questions that we talk about in step 8, continuous improvement. And it gives you a lot of ideas. Ideas for getting student feedback at the module level, at the course level, for assignments that work, for instructional material that works or that doesn't work, information on technology. So we give you a host of sample questions, why you may want to use them. We draft out some ways that you can ask them, and then also there's a good section there for all the ways that could be used specifically for revision. So I hope you find that helpful. All right. And I'm going to rely on the rest of the hosts and panelists if there were any questions in the chat that I could help with.
I didn't see any questions, but we have some time. If there are questions, you can put it in the chat or the Q&A.
Mhm.
And Megan also has stuck around in case you still have some AI questions as well.
Out of curiosity, has anybody read the book?
I've started, not
Yay,
finished, but
thank
it's great.
you. Thank you.
While
I
we're
have-
waiting for the panelists, Bethany, I was surprised that you said you would recommend taking an accelerated, no. Yeah, if you're doing two versions, short and full semester, that you'd start with a full semester. I have always told our faculty the opposite, start with the short version because I thought it'd be easier to expand it. So I was just wondering the rationale for starting with the long version and condensing it.
Good question. Okay, let me clarify. Usually the scenario is I've either taught the long version or I've taught the shortened version. So my experience has been that it's pretty rare that you're developing two different lengths at the same time. So what I meant was if you have an existing course and it's full term and then you're asked to adapt that to a shortened term, that was the scenario. Or it could be vice versa. There are, courses that were developed as shortened, courses, whether it's in a graduate program and they're on that carousel approach, or it's a shortened summer course, and then they have to expand it. But typically, my experience hasn't been that faculty are asked to develop both lengths at the same time. But in that case, I think it's easier to develop the full term and shrink it. Here's why I'm going to say that, and I'm just thinking about this now. So that's why I said this is a really good question. What I found is that when you're developing a shortened course, you pay way more attention to that shortened time than you do when you're developing a full term. And I have heard so many faculty say, well, the only way that I can teach this, in half the time, in 7 weeks or 8 weeks, is if I take things out. And we can't do that, right? We know that we have to give students the same material, the same educational opportunity. It's that educational parity idea. So I think sometimes it's just mentally easier for us to think in that full term and then to think about, well, how would I concentrate some of this work, move some of these due dates? Sometimes that structure is a little bit different. And that's one of the things I think AI can help you with. But yeah, good question. Good question, Sherry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Bethany, thank you so much for those little bonus nuggets. Those are great.
You're welcome.
If you haven't seen those folks, go back into the chat, downloadable or accessible docs there on Google Drive that you can get to for these extensions and going deeper links. Other questions? We're going to take a break at about 11 o'clock. So just a few more. We do have a few more minutes now for questions for either of our primary presenters.
Yes, if you have more AI questions for Megan, please feel free to ask them.
I have a practical question. Megan, what did you use to generate your slides?
Yeah, I just used Canva. I used Canva to do my slides, and sometimes I will do Canva Magic Studio or OpenAI to generate my images. But I really like my theme colors to match, so I've found that can be pretty time consuming. I have done that before. But yeah, I really love Canva, and it's really flexible with PowerPoint too, in case you need to download your Canva into PowerPoint to go to a conference and put it up on the big screen. So I really, really love Canva for those of you who haven't tried Canva. And I'll just say as a general statement, I answered this in one space, but I saw it answered in different areas. I just want to say in general for ethical use and privacy use with these tools. I can't speak to all of them, but I did post in the Q&A somewhere the privacy policy for OpenAI, and it's very robust and it does have protections in place for children. And it talks about informed consent, and it does not store student data. And the great thing about OpenAI is if you have an account, that's personal to you. It's not something where they're going to use that to train other instances of it for other people's accounts. That's going to be special and unique to you, unless you do get the paid account and you decide to intentionally create a custom GPT on the back end where you're controlling the step-by-step process and where it's feeding its knowledge from your documents or the internet or both. And then you share that functionality out to others or publish it in the GPT store, then somebody could have access, but you have to be very intentional. It couldn't be done on accident. So that particular tool is very good for protecting data and privacy and respecting people's privacy. And then if you don't feel comfortable with it, then you don't have to share that information. I like to use people's specific names in my private tools, but if you just want to say student A or student B because it just makes you feel better, then do that. I've absolutely done that. And then you can just say, I want it to say very generic, hello student, and thank you professor. And you don't even have to share your name. You can keep your boundaries up with your open AI, right? But I think there's some good policies in place for that. And there was a lot of conversation on equity with OpenAI too. And to that, I say, I think that's still a problem these days, especially I have some colleagues who teach in the American South, and they're like, a lot of students still don't have computers and internet access. And I think that's just still a distance education problem, right? In online education, that access is still a problem. And so likewise, it translates into some of these companion technology tools. And so I think you can be open with choice in your assignments. Say, I want you to find something to help you refine your thinking. Maybe it's Google, maybe it's OpenAI, maybe it's another tool, or maybe just it's a conversation with your peers, you choose. And that way it's not going to, single anyone out.
All right. Thank you so much, both Megan and Bethany. Excellent, excellent conversations to get us going for the rest of the semester here and having us thinking about all things QM and AI and how that works together. But wait, there's more. We have more panelists coming. We are excited to welcome the next set of speakers who are going to be talking about some practical application of some of these ideas, what they're doing in their courses. And we are going to take a break first, though, so people can run, get a bio break, refill their coffee. And so I'm going to start the timer. And I guess I need to edit it a little bit. We'll say 10 minutes. So, but we will actually, I'm going to edit that down to 9 and we'll get started back at 11:10. Thank you, folks.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I have set that timer, so you've got about 7:52 to run your errands, and then we'll be back at 11:10.